Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with Teos Abadia. I didn't give you an adjective today, Teos. I apologize.
That means 2 next time. You got to store them. I don't know.
I'll give you two
Well, actually, you
adjectives
gave me
next
2
time.
last time, so I think we're okay. We're fine. But
Right, we're even.
happy Tofurkey to everybody, right?
That's right. We are recording a bit early, but this is our Thanksgiving episode. So we give thanks to all of you who listen to us jibber jabber, and we are having all sorts of travels next week. So we wanted to get this episode in early. We are going every which way but loose here.
Yeah. So
On
all of our
Mastering
news
Dungeons.
today is news that we're just making up. We're just guessing what's going to happen.
No. That's true. We are predicting the future, but we're giving it like it's news.
Yeah.
And I was going to name some news outlets that pretty much do that, but I will save that for another episode. But we do have some Tweetbag and Patreon missives from our listeners and from our patrons, and some really good questions and comments this week. So let's dive right in with a side helping of mashed potatoes. David Somerville via Patreon says, "Your great conversation about equipment got me thinking about crafting rules. I know these have been tackled in a number of robust third-party supplements, but I've also heard arguments that crafting isn't sufficiently tied to the core D&D experience to be worth bothering with. Do you have an opinion on how crafting can or can't work in D&D? Have you seen any approaches to this that have really excelled or run particularly great crafting mechanics in your own games? Thanks." Well, David, I'm glad you asked, because boy, do we have opinions on this. So to get to how I've done it, when we were working on the Monster Grimoire for Ghostfire Gaming, we wanted to make a system that was fairly straightforward, that was focused on story, but still gave the players and the DM some flexibility to have crafting be a part of the game. So what we did was said, if you defeat monsters, you can use their parts in various ways. And we tied it to some downtime. We tied it to a monetary investment, and we tied it to a skill or a tool proficiency, and then a relatively low DC, sometimes along with magic that you would have to cast on this item, maybe once a day, maybe less, depending on how long it took. And we thought that would be a fairly simple mechanical way to handle it, but also allow DMs to take that system and make whatever they wanted with it. So if you defeat a dragon, you could use its scales to do this, or if you defeated some sea monster, you could make its brain into food that would do something. But a DM could just as easily change out any of that, but use that formula that we created to do their stuff. What are your thoughts, Teos?
Yeah. Crafting can be tricky. In fact, I think the more that it is a super core system, almost the less I like it, because it almost becomes a meta game that everybody's trying to play. And so, third edition, where people were say crafting magic items all the time, became like a game within a game, and can be a little too strong. Sort of, if it's worth doing, it's kind of too strong, right? And so I like approaches like what you're describing, what that Ghostfire Games does, and that your author had done before. I like things like downtime, where there's a lot of DM hand on the throttle kind of thing, a lot of DM direction, and that's the approach that I tend to use. Is so I would take something like what Ghostfire has done, or another system that you like that, and then I just use it for specific occasions. And I really like doing that. That's what I find works great, is when you just say, hey, in this remote village that you happen across, the old woman tells you of this story that if you fell the blah, blah, blah beast, a block can be made from its hide. And that's cool, right? That's really neat stuff and gets everybody excited. But it's not like where it's just this exploitable system kind of spinning around in the background that only casters use, or, Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said was, if it's worth doing, it's not worth doing. And that's
Yeah,
pretty spot on, actually, in terms of the more you give players exactly what they want and a way to do it, the more imbalance you're going to get with your parties,
yeah,
or intra parties. Um, but there is that storytelling, that storytelling grist for the mill that you can really tap into if you use crafting in the right way. I love the idea of there's this monster that's about to threaten the village. The monster's coming, and it can only be killed if you have X, Y, and Z.
right.
Now you can make X, Y, and Z, so you better get to it. And if you don't make it in time, then you're in trouble. Are you going to spend the time and the resources to make sure that it gets done right? Or are you going to sort
Hmm.
of take a risk that you don't do it right the first time in order to go out and do these other things that
Right.
might also help? So that way you get a story and you can almost see the movie, right?
Yeah.
As the Smiths are feverishly working over
Yeah.
their their anvils, sweating, wiping their brow, making these blades that are the only thing
Yeah.
that can defeat the were creatures. So yeah,
And
that's what I want to get out of my
yeah.
crafting.
Yeah, and when it's kind of like in the domain of myth, right? Like you see this and when you're reading the books for Song of Ice and Fire, there's this sort of like, what this obsidian, will do is not entirely clear, and that's kind of cool, right? And why did people wrap it up and put it on this hill and hide it away, and those kinds of questions, right? Or why are the myths
Right.
talking about this thing? And when you can weave that together, oh man, that makes a campaign so cool. And something like downtime is a nice system where it's the nice thing about downtime is the DM has to sort of work with the player to establish its use. So that makes it a not
Mhm.
exploitable system, right? It's not just a loop they can always do. You've got to have
Right.
this time in which you're doing it, and the DM has a hand in that, and that to me makes it a really nice system. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's great stuff. The other thing I'd say is just
Right.
anything like this, where you can take the mechanics and hide them inside of story bits is really great, right? So I remember one
Mhm.
campaign that was a Dark Sun campaign. I put a thing in there that there were these, I think it was a leaf, like a dried leaf that a person in a village gave to the party and sort of said that when you were in a time of need or something, you could break it or eat it. I forget what it was, but what that did was give you a sort of vision. Actually, it was curative and it
Mhm.
gave you a vision all at the same time. And so they were like, well, I want to do it when I'm in trouble and I really need to, like, it was sort of a potion of healing essentially, right? But it came with a vision was what it was. And so that extra bit made it super interesting to them, even though it's literally a potion of healing and me telling you some campaign info, right? But it
Right.
had a
Yeah.
much larger presence in the game because of that dress up that you give to it. So that's also my approach to things like
Yeah.
crafting.
And it sort of fits in with what we did for Acquisitions Incorporated as well with the downtime,
Hmm.
where you could use generic downtime rules, but you could also, as a story, when they finish one part of their quest or their mission and are getting ready for the next, you can set up some specific things, and crafting could be a part of that. It
Yeah,
could be you
yeah,
can make this thing that will be important, or you can go out and try to make money that you might be able to use in a different way, or you can make connections to the people in the town where the next part of your mission is going to be. So in
yeah,
that sense, crafting becomes part of a larger story, and it doesn't have to be super mechanical. It can just be, okay, you want to create it. You're proficient with blacksmith tools, fine, you can create it. It's just going to cost you this time and this money. So you're
yeah.
using up these resources that you will later have to replenish probably, but you get to do it.
Yeah, and that kind of story dress up also it's control for your game because you can't just do this all the time. You've got to find that rare whatever it is to make part of it. So the players automatically just know, hey, I'm doing this one time or a couple times. I'm not just endlessly gaining some benefit through this repetitious task. Cool.
Yep. So the next question from Twitter by Andy Dumps. A problem I don't hear mentioned is that backgrounds can figure in home games, but there's rarely space for them in published adventures.
Mhm.
Oracle of War was a rare example of backgrounds actually being used in published adventures, as they triggered access to information or NPCs. But you still never saw "you can seek refuge in a church" come up. That only fits in a freewheeling home game. What do
Mhm.
you think, Teos?
Yeah, I agree with that. This really jumped out at me when I saw this on Twitter, and it's something that we've talked about a little bit when we were breaking down one D&D, which removes these kinds of features, or when we're reviewing 5e backgrounds, that these features, they sort of have a story purpose. They tell you a little bit about what your character is choosing to have come from, but don't really engage the game steadily and always, but could perhaps have done a different way. Um, and I had sort of two thoughts when I read this. One is, yes, I want better than "you can seek refuge in a church," because realistically, how often are you going to need that? Like, first of all, characters usually don't seek refuge. I'm fine, I'm good. I'll pay money to stay at the inn. Like they don't need to stay in a church, and so it's almost the wrong thing that you're offering up. So you do need to offer things that they will want, and that usually is around answering questions, and
Mm,
and having some sort of edge on a situation by getting knowledge. I think is something that fits better. And there are a few that do that. Like, I think the criminal's a little easier to use in that respect. But the other thing I've noticed is a lot of the recent books have a background that is jarring with the actual adventure that they are representing, right? So a good example to me is Witchlight, which is one of my favorite 5e official adventures. But one of the backgrounds that's given there is being from the Witchlight Carnival. And this is the kind of thing that's
right.
come up a couple times where the background means you already know all this stuff that you as a player don't know. So it's really jarring, right? It's like your
Right.
background is to know all this stuff. You work here. And yet I'm supposed to, as DM, tell you what the carnival games are like. I mean, you could tell me, except you can't because you don't know any of this, right? And it's like, but the whole fun of it
Right.
is that you're seeing this for the first time. So it's like a really weird background that doesn't fit the job, right?
Yeah. To have backgrounds really, really work well in a campaign, the best thing to do is to curate them, limit them, and then write into your adventures the exact place where
Mm.
this is really useful and really beneficial, and helps drive the story forward by someone having that background. Um, and so we did that a little bit with Oracle of War, as Andy says,
Right.
but even then, it was sort of limited to how we could do it, because there are so many backgrounds out there that people might
Mhm.
choose from. So
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good tip, that if you are running a long campaign and you have ownership of that campaign, then you can more easily think through, okay, what are your backgrounds? I'm going to look up these features. I'm going to think
mm,
about where to use them. But from the writing designing
right.
perspective, design backgrounds that will help tell a great story, that'll have
Mm,
utility, right? And that won't mess up the parameters of the story, right? It's like, um, and even some of them, like, I don't know what the Dragonlance backgrounds are, right? But imagine that a Dragonlance background was, ex draconian soldier. Like, that would be problematic, because part of the idea of Dragonlance is that you're revealing these threats. And if this person could just tell you
right.
everything, like, that would be totally right. It's an interesting background,
Right.
but it's problematic with the play experience we're trying to, right? It's contrary to that play experience we're trying to create. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Very true. All right, and our final bit of Twitter bag mail-ish stuff comes from Bernard Grobauer via Patreon. Uh, Here's a question, actually a whole smorgasbord of questions. I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts about, sort of a side quest to the ongoing campaign that is D&D's playtests for its draft rules.
That's really
What are
funny.
your thoughts on experiences with, and maybe even best practices for playtests
Mhm.
for adventure drafts? For example, what are the questions you want a playtest to answer? How do you go about carrying out playtests for your own adventure drafts? And how much playtesting is, quote, good enough? What changes do you find yourself typically making to your drafts in response to your playtests? And this brought to mind an old joke in the quality assurance engineering field. So a software tester walks into a bar and orders one beer. A software tester walks into a bar and orders 2 beers. A software tester walks into a bar and orders -1 beers. A software tester walks into a bar and orders QWERTY beers. A software tester walks into a bar and asks where the bathroom is, and the bar burns down. So the I did QA testing in my former life, and what I did was I took playtest adventure methods from that testing of
Mm,
software. So when you're testing software, and this goes to those jokes I just told, oh, the happy path is the path that you expect the software to take. So the first thing I do is say, what do I expect from this?
mm,
If I run a playtest of it, does it follow that path? Is what I expected to happen what actually happens when the players interact with it? All right. Generally, it's pretty close, but sometimes it goes way off the rails. If it goes way off the rails, I know the players if the players are normal players who aren't looking to do anything crazy like put in -1 beers or QWERTY beers, then they're going to probably follow the path. But there are times when I'm way off, assuming that they're going to do one thing when they obviously the logical choice is to do something else. So then I'm looking at what are the common alternate paths that the adventure players will take, that the characters will take in the adventure. And have I addressed those in the text? So I expect that they're going to see the crime scene and go talk to the sheriff. And there might be NPCs that even tell them to go talk to the sheriff. But did I put something in the adventure that maybe gives a clue that rather than going to talk to the sheriff, they should go to the inn where the victim was staying? All right. Have I addressed that in some way? If I've addressed it in some way, great. If I haven't, then I need to add that. Then I look at are some of the results I'm seeing or that the users are experiencing preferable to my expected path?
mhm.
So if I'm telling us if the story I expect to play out is they go here, and then I realize, you know what, that's bad. That's not a good story. It would be much better if they did it this way. By play testing it, I can usually see that changing who an NPC is to make it more dramatic or more funnier or however, then you can do those things. The one thing that I rarely play test to see, because in my experience it really doesn't matter, is the is it too easy or too hard
Mhm.
thing. These things are rarely testable. I have had times when I sent it to a group of 4 players who I thought weren't that strong, and then a group of 6 players who I thought were superpower gamers, and said, "Tell me what you think of this, of the exact same thing." And I would get back to 4 people who don't have optimized characters saying it's too easy. We just stomped everything. And the 6 power gamers said this is way too hard just because of the way the dice fell or how the DM ran it.
Yeah.
So that's not something that I generally worry about. If I get a group of people and then another group and then another group telling me that it's too easy or too hard, then I'll listen, but I don't usually worry about that. So those are the things that I'm looking at. I'm looking at it as does this adventure that I've written work as a user manual for a DM
Right. Right.
who is trying to facilitate a story for their group?
So I'll
Your
add to
thoughts?
that. That's all really good. Not much to add. Just a couple things that playtesting is important, right? Because you need to understand how this is going to come across and reveal the blind spots that you have, as Shawn mentioned. But you want to understand what playtest feedback looks like and almost design so that you understand what you're playtesting. And the easiest way I know to do that is you have to DM tons of tables at conventions. And I almost think it should be like mandatory job for anybody who's going to look at playtest feedback is know lots of different groups. If you only know your one group, then you're kind of going to interpret everything that comes playtest wise as if it was your group when it's not. They're radically different groups. And you're going to write for your group when you need to be writing for all those many groups. So the first thing I'd almost say is you want to start with run a lot of games for lots of random people. You will then be able to
Mhm.
understand playtest feedback better that's coming in. Because I've had, and I've shared on my blog, situations where there is playtest feedback that says, it was too easy, we blew it away. It was too hard, this is unbelievable, we got to tone this down. And then a third group saying it's just great. And that is of no value, that playtest report, unless they tell you why. And when they tell you why, you can
Mhm.
unlock the reasons for those things, and you can actually work on those aspects, but only if you're willing to pull that. And I've had situations where I worked with a company, for example, that told me, "Oh, what you wrote was too hard. We ran a playtest." I'm like, "One playtest? Do you know anything about the group?" No.
Mhm.
Like, don't change anything. What do you mean? It's not data. It
Yeah.
isn't. This has no value. I don't.
Right.
I mean, I know, I hear you, but I wouldn't change a thing. And they're like,
Right.
"Why?" I'm like, "Well, because that one table could mean anything, and the next group could completely disagree,
Yeah.
and I don't know why they want me to change a thing or in which way. So I really don't even know what I could change. It's not worth changing."
Right. Yeah. Unless now a good example of what Teos is talking about is you get that feedback, and if the players or the DM or whoever writes the report says it was very hard, the door that leads into the last chamber closed, leaving 2 characters
Mhm.
inside and 3 characters
Right.
outside the door, and therefore the 2 characters were killed by the things in there, and the other 3 characters could not get in. Now that's helpful. That
Hmm.
explains why this happened, and that's something that can and should be fixed.
Yeah.
But unless you know that detail, it doesn't matter
And
that it's just, quote, "too hard."
I don't know any specific sources, but something worth looking at is how people playtest board games. Because if you think about a board game, it's a really weird thing where you really kind of need to observe people play to understand why they're making the
Mhm,
choices they're making, which may be contrary to what you thought when you designed the board game. And so there will be groups that, they run board games, they'll have people play it, and they just sit and watch, right? Impassively watch and write down what people are doing. And that's almost what you need to do to do a play test, but we seldom can do that, right? We have to rely on some written report.
mhm.
So you need to get that information that would have been accessible to you if you had just been silently watching that whole play session, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and everything we're talking about is answering the question of you running your own playtest.
Mm.
If you can view someone else running the playtest, that is even more helpful
Yeah.
for the most part than running your own.
Yeah. Cause you'll self correct your
And
things.
I
So you
would
want other
suggest
people.
doing that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But the last bit is what's the most important thing in the playtest? Is the most important thing in the playtest the story, and you want to make sure the story flows, then that's what you're going to rely on. When I was doing my playtesting for Descent into, not Descent into Avernus, into Defiance and Flan, the most important thing was this needs to be playable in 55 minutes or less
Yeah.
and still be a complete story. So when I was playtesting, I playtested it with many different groups, and I had a stopwatch, and that was what I was testing, right? I'm running this quickly, and I'm looking at my stopwatch the whole time. Am I
Hmm.
going to do, it's over in 30 minutes and people are disappointed? Is it going to be it's over in 62 minutes and now the next table is going to be late because we have to run with this every hour? That's the sort of thing that I had to focus on. Now that's an edge case, obviously.
Yeah. But
Speaking of
no,
software
it's
testing,
good to have
that's
those
an edge
goals.
case, but yeah, yep.
Yeah. Awesome.
So we could do whole shows on play testing, and it's one of the hardest things to talk about
Yeah.
because there's differences between adventures and game mechanics and so on. So uh, thank you for the question. I hope that helped. Now we can jump right into our news and commentary. And even though we only had a few days before between our recordings, a lot of new news popped up here, including Dragon Plus being removed, D&D Beyond being poised to take over the D&D Discord, and what about the D&D website? So I'm going to let you dig into this because this is
Oh,
your big
yeah.
cup of hot steamy tea.
I was a little steamy when I read the news. So there was a blog post on November 15th on D&D Beyond, which already is interesting because it's like, okay, we got a blog post from Chris Perkins on D&D Beyond when that would have been on the normally on the D&D website. So here's another post that normally would be on the D&D website. So a post on D&D Beyond saying that the Dragon Plus magazine, the app, website, and all content would be no longer available in the future. November 15th, which is the day it was posted.
Mhm.
So it was like, hey, we're going to be
Yeah.
removing this now. So, and while
Yep.
they had said, and we reported, they had said that Dragon Plus would be no longer publishing, that same editorial has this wording about, we'll be looking for ways to integrate this content, da 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 da. And here it goes, just, we hit the delete button. So that was quite surprising. You
Yeah.
can read that blog post through the link in our show notes. But I mean, when you really think about all these interviews, the amazing cover art that was created, right? Like Ralph Horsey had that amazing kobold drawing. Um, Interviews
Yeah.
of staff members, looks back on organized play, free maps and adventures, awesome covers, all kinds of things. All of that is just kind of gone. And you saw something
Yeah.
interesting on Twitter.
Yeah, so Matt Chapman, who was the editor for Dragon Plus, worked with the company that published it, posted on Twitter this: "Yesterday was a weird day. 7 years and 41 issues of my D&D work were deleted from the internet." Uh, and then these turned up in the mail. It's the circle of life, and he had a picture of the Dungeons and Dragons Adventurer magazine that we talked about a few shows ago that's available only in the UK. And Matt Chapman is also located in the UK, I believe.
Hmm.
So I'm hoping that he's associated with that, and that's a
Yeah,
sort of karmic circle where he gets to do this new cool thing with Dungeons and
yeah,
Dragons licensed products, since he lost all of that 7 years of work
yeah,
that he
yeah. And I
did
was
on
talking to some friends today,
Plus.
along with Shawn and I were talking with some friends today, where almost everybody in the room had contributed something to Dragon Plus, uh, and now it's gone. Now you can get it through the FR Wiki. The FR Wiki, Forgotten Realms Wiki, is a great place to look up all kinds of Forgotten Realms lore, but it also covers a lot of history too. And we've put a link in our
Mhm.
show notes to where you can get to all the different issues as a PDF via the Wayback Machine. PDF's not a perfect vehicle for this because these were not provided as PDFs originally. So this is sort of an approximation of what the magazines look like. I hope that Wizards will do something and provide this in some fashion, because I do think it should be out there. But at least you can download PDFs of this to have some record of it. You're not going to get all the links and everything, but it's at least something for things like the interviews. Um,
Yeah.
the other, yeah, what are you gonna say?
Oh, were you going to say something else about this?
No, I was gonna move on to the Discord news.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so the other thing that came out on the very same day, November 15th, was on the D&D Discord channel. They announced that it's going to be shutting down on December 7th, and that they will use the D&D Beyond Discord, renaming that to the Dungeons and Dragons Discord, even though the D&D Discord has more members. So, there's this sort of interesting, like, the blogs are moving to the D&D Beyond website, the Discord's moving to the D&D Beyond site. The Is the whole D&D website going to shut down? Probably, right? So it's interesting, this whole migration, and then it made me wonder about all kinds of things, like is Dragon Talk going to go away and just use the videos? Like who knows, right? It's all just speculative on what I'm just saying, but there's something there going on around consolidating of these sites, um, which I think in some cases could be great and make it more efficient for
Yeah.
Wizards, and that's all fine and good. But also the opportunity to lose history and content, right? And increasingly, and we see this in today's Twitter discussion too, but increasingly, you cannot count on platforms to hold your valuable information,
Mhm.
whether it's something you created or someone else created, for any length of time, right? It can all just vaporize. So you have to save as you go, unfortunately.
Right. They say, and everything you put on the internet stays around forever. You just might not be able to find it
Yeah, that's true.
unless you don't want it found, and then it will be found pretty easily. Uh, but I think it makes sense in some strange way that they're doing everything through D&D Beyond now, because I have a feeling that that's what they want. I have a
Mm,
feeling that they want eyes on D&D Beyond. I think
mm,
that's where they see their main. I don't want to say that, the main crux of the game, but that's where players are going more
mhm.
than the D&D website,
They
right?
want that
I'm
engagement
playing
and,
tonight,
yeah,
right?
subscriptions
I'm going, my
and
character's on
mhm,
D&D Beyond. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
It,
character's there, that's where I'm going, and so that's where the natural funneling of eyes and funneling of attention is going to be, and they'll save the D&D website for more corporate, for more, you know, not public relations in the sense of players, but public relations in the sense of investors or
sure.
business connections, that sort of thing.
Well, I'm fine with that, but there are things that the D&D website does often poorly, like say direct people to
Mhm,
organized play. And so the more you have to
mhm,
cram that all into a single website, the harder it is to do it well, right? You know, where should errata go? Where should um, organized play information go? Where should how to get started go? And the D&D Beyond site is great, but you know, like if I want to find your old awesome columns on how to write an adventure, I basically just have to already know they exist. By the way, they exist, people,
mhm.
and go do a search because otherwise, there's no way I'm ever seeing them. Right? There's no indexing of all those blog posts by topic or things like that. I'm just gonna have to run a search for your name, and then I'll find them. But I don't know they're there. Right? There's no good. It's just it all just It's just a fire hose of information that just
Yeah.
keeps hiding itself. And so that's the kind of thing where it's difficult, right? And it also means that especially as we see that whatever this one D&D does, things can become outdated. I might run a search for whatever, you know, backgrounds and come up with an article that's all based on the old way backgrounds worked, and it might be super confusing for a new person. And so there's just yeah, it's hard, right? That's always anything. All companies struggle with this, but here we're seeing D&D struggle with it.
Yeah. Yep. Well, since we're talking about, D&D and infrastructure, let's talk about this new news from this morning that it looks like Hasbro might be selling eOne. So Hasbro purchased eOne for $4 billion in 2019, 3 short years ago.
You could buy
And
10
we
Twitters for
reported
that.
on this as, yeah, I mean,
Or sorry,
we,
for one Twitter you can buy
yeah,
10 E1s, but yeah.
you could, yeah, right. So actually 11, but who's counting? Um, and we thought, this is huge, right? This is Hasbro stepping into the 21st century and becoming not just a game manufacturer, not just a toy manufacturer, but a manufacturer of all sorts of content, including movies
Yeah.
and streaming and TV shows, and maybe even having their own streaming service where they could get into Transformers and GI Joe and D&D and Magic and etc. and etc. and etc. But
Mhm.
there's a report on Bleeding Cool that says Hasbro has announced that it's readying eOne for sale after receiving interest from outside buyers. So you read this article, Teos. Tell me what you saw.
Everything I saw stunned me. Yeah, just like you said, my assumption was, of course, E1 has got to be this pivotal purchase. You spent $4 billion because this is going to let you finally own your properties, right? You're going to stop saying, "Hey, I have a new Transformers thing. Somebody make a movie for me. Thanks, Paramount. Here's, we'll split some money," and you're going to own it yourself and make all the profit from it, right? Well, apparently that didn't happen. And there's a quote here from the CEO, Chris Cox, says, "Following our recent investor day where we introduced our new branded entertainment strategy, Blueprint 2.0, we received inbound interest from several parties for the part of the E1 television and film business that, while valuable, is not core to our go forward strategy. This interest informed our decision to explore a sales process. As we execute Blueprint 2.0 with a focus on strategic investments in key franchise brands like D&D, Peppa Pig, and Transformers, we plan to expand our entertainment offerings across scripted TV, digital shorts, and blockbuster films. We look forward to delighting audiences of all ages, blah, 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 blah." But it's so interesting. It's like we're still doing all these things, but my guess is, we're going to use partners, right? We're not going to own it ourselves.
Right.
And maybe they just found that to be too hard, that they weren't positioned to act upon it. I don't know, but it's really surprising because to me, I thought that would be a clear, smart move for Hasbro to own this, right? But I guess it is not to be. So super interesting, and it'll
Hmm.
be super interesting to see what they can sell it for, right? Have they added to E1, or is E1 less valuable than it was before? It'll be interesting to see what the price
Yeah.
ends up being.
Yep, we will definitely keep an eye on seeing who purchases it for how much, and if there is any strategic connection to Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast in that purchase.
Yeah.
New news, Game Rant says that a leak says that Wizards of the Coast will drop the OGL from 6th edition. So this we've heard this rumor a few times now,
Hmm.
coming from different places, from Twitter, from YouTube. Now this came up in a comicbook.com video, where it appears that some are hearing from inside Wizards of the Coast that the company may drop the open gaming license from their 1D&D 6e game that is set to be released in 2024, the 60th 60th
50th,
anniversary
right? 50th.
of 50th. 74 to 24, yeah, that's 50. I forgot how old I was.
27.
Yes, exactly.
Uh-huh.
So this would mean that a creator or company could continue to create 5e content, but not 6e content. Um, uh, yeah, I talked about this already
On the
in a different
Lorecast.
podcast, so
Yeah, yeah, that was a
I'm
great
gonna
listen.
let you take the lead here.
Well, I liked what you all talked about. It's worth checking out what the Lorecast says about it, but I think that it is it's really very fascinating to me, and the perspective I look at this right is when third edition had the open gaming license, it was both good and bad, right? There were gluts in product at some points. There were a lot of companies that went under, but there were also like this enormous number of people who developed skill sets and ended up working in the industry for many, many years, still work in this industry as a result of having had that expertise. So I think the hobby overall was better for it. But D&D also ended up with a Pathfinder that was hugely competitive during the third edition and fourth edition era. So there, I can see a lot of trepidation that any company would have had. But if you look at it from where it's been from the start of 5e on, I can't think of any examples of it being negative for D&D and Wizards of the Coast.
Mhm.
The open gaming license seems to have created a lot of focus on D&D as a game. Uh, Creates almost a camaraderie between people, creates its own community, and a like being beholden and favorable towards wizards because of this ability to create, whether it's on the DM's Guild or outside of it. And so turning that off just seems to me super surprising, especially when you look at what when D&D is doing and the reception isn't so hot, right? It's not like the reception to one D&D is everybody going like, "Yes, please give me all these." These are one D&D is changing everything I wanted changed, right? There's very little
Mhm.
of that, um, and so what that could mean is all these creators just keep creating 5e when D&D is trying to move forward. So it's a really fascinating question. I hope that the kind of if there are if this leak inside sources are actually accurate, that's an ongoing conversation that conversation will change. I've in the past been against an open gaming license, judging it solely by the third edition era,
Mhm.
um, but I looking at it through the fifth edition lens, I don't know how Wizards could see this as being I understand that an individual could incorrectly say let's stop this, let's keep all the money, whatever, but there's so many ways that D&D can benefit from this open game license that I'd be shocked uh, if they really end up down that road. So I hope they don't.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of, what did Wizards lose from this? They didn't really lose anything. They
Yeah.
may not have gained as much as they could have, which is different than losing
Hmm.
something. But you and I have both worked in the corporate world, so we know that the you know the red line or the black line is the bottom line.
Hmm.
And if you can make more money and you're expected to make more money than you did last year, you are looking for any way to raise that bottom line.
Yeah.
And if you think you can do so by eliminating the ability for people to create, and even in the same space you are,
Yeah.
or like I've said, make $1 million Kickstarters and you are not getting any of that, it can be very tempting to try to go after that piece of the pie, and I don't think it will benefit Wizards to do so in the long run,
Mhm.
um, or at least not to do so in a way that shuts everyone out.
Yeah.
But it's it's going to be fun and terrifying to watch.
Yeah. And I'll say one more piece, which is that I think a lot of the benefit of possibly shutting this off, the where I can see it making the most sense from a corporate sense, is if you're also trying to say, and everyone will come to the D&D Beyond site and use the D&D Beyond virtual tabletop tool, and all of the content will be digital inside of there. The more
Mhm,
that you're believing in that sort of a model, the more that then you go, well, and I don't want external places drawing away from that.
mhm.
And so I can see, I can hear that and go like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from, but also you're wrong because
Right.
the game will probably not be that if it's going to be big, right? If it's big, you have people playing in gaming stores and in their basements and at parks and everywhere, right? And the expression of it is wide and open. If you try to put it into some funnel, you may control a larger percentage of that profit, but now that will become a smaller stream because it can only be but so
Mhm.
big if you really
Yep.
funnel it down that way. So,
And one of the things I really haven't thought about until I'm just discussing it with you
mm,
here is, these rumors coming out of Wizards of the Coast. The people that are going to make this decision are high up on the food chain. Uh, they have C's in their titles, right? They
yeah.
have vice president in their titles. The people that aren't going to make this decision are the people who are most in touch with the game and with the
Mhm.
community. And it makes me believe the rumors more when I think that, you know what, maybe it's somebody who realizes what a horrible decision it would be to do it. And they're leaking this information, even if it's not 100% true, they
Mhm.
might not even know. But to leak it out there to let the people in charge know what the community thinks about
Right.
this,
Right.
what a bad idea it is. And that might help keep it from happening.
Yeah.
I can only hope.
Yeah. I mean, just and it's as simple as someone might look and say, "Hey, you know, Ghostfire's making this Grim Hollow thing. We want to do some scary horror laden stuff. Why they're taking away our money?" But when you look at how many people have made horror things using the
Mhm.
open gaming license, you realize Wizards cannot make all those things.
Sure.
It only works when it's in the third party arena, and that's the strength of it, right? That provides all
Yeah.
these different expressions at scales and volumes that work for those companies that would not work for Wizards. And Wizards does not want, if you turn that off, all these other companies will do things that are actually really competitive with you rather than being in line with you, right?
Right.
And bolstering you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Uh, there was an interesting blog article from Jason Tondro, a senior designer at Wizards of the Coast, about how he landed his job at Paizo and then how he landed the job at Wizards of the Coast. So he was formerly an editor and a designer at Paizo, working on uh, both Pathfinder and Starfinder.
Yeah.
And then he left Paizo to join Wizards of the Coast. So his article was how I got the best job in gaming on his blog. And he shared his experiences and tips for landing jobs at these companies. So this is a very interesting read if you want to work at a larger game design firm, or if you're just curious about, what the process would be and what types of skills are required. He shared some salary information. So in his initial position at Paizo, he is making double what he did at Paizo
Yeah. At Wizards is making
initially,
double. Yeah.
double,
Yeah.
and he was making about $50,000, and now he's making a six-figure income working at Wizards of the Coast with bonuses and
Yeah.
with other benefits that he likely was not getting at Paizo.
And he didn't say it
Um,
in this blog entry, but well, he did say in this blog entry that 50,000 was after getting a raise,
mhm,
substantial raise and position change within Paizo. But what he didn't say that he had said before on Twitter was that while at Paizo he would work weekends to gain the supplemental income required to pay rent. and other
Mhm.
costs. And
Right.
so it's like that 50,000 is, and he does say here it's not enough. They were, I think, applying for rent controlled apartment or something at the time, right? So like the 50,000 was
Right.
not enough to survive. And then he goes to Wizards and doubles it, which is, that's
Yeah.
something.
Yep. And living in Seattle, $50,000 isn't going to go as far as 50,000 might go elsewhere.
And what'd you
Um,
think about what he said regarding the pipeline of sort of talent?
yeah, it made perfect sense to me. There's always been this sort of um, I used to call Paizo like the farm team of
Mm,
Wizards of the Coast, right? You
or like
would
baseball.
if you if you if you got yeah, that's a sports reference, Mike Shea. Um, so if you got let go from Wizards,
Yeah.
you could generally safely land a gig at Paizo.
Hmm.
And then if you got experience and Wizards was looking for someone, the skills that you learned that you developed at Paizo would generally translate pretty well to Wizards of the Coast, which is why we see a lot of people from Paizo, not just game designers, but marketing folks and support staff and all sorts of things, editors coming over to work at Wizards after that.
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense. The only thing that I would warn people is everybody's path in this
Hmm.
industry is different. I've talked to people who have like Jason who toiled away with very low wages and long hours and lots of things, and they finally got this shot and they made it. Um, I worked for free for so many years with Adventures League before I got paid for a dime of my writing. And sometimes it was literally a dime, it seemed like, uh, you know, getting a chance to work directly for Wizards. But there are also stories where somebody comes out of a creative writing program, writes a couple of really good articles for a third party publisher, and boom, they're hired.
Yeah.
So the paths are different, and you can learn a lesson that someone else learned and it might not apply to you. Doesn't mean it's not interesting to know it. It's not good, valuable information to have in your back pocket,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that that's the exact path you could take, should take,
Yeah.
or would take.
And what I think is really valuable, if you go down that path, he gives you lots of tips for what the interview process is like at both of those companies and what it's like to move between departments in both companies. And that idea
Mhm.
of how he preps, you know, extensively for the types of questions they'll ask in those interviews. That's pretty, I think, useful to know if you were going down that path, which of course there are many different paths. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And last but not least, we have an announcement from WizKids telling us about their new movie minis and plushies. We're going to call this the Alpha Streams look at minis portion of our news. So tell us all about it.
Well, yeah, the plushies are an owl bear, Thumberchod the red dragon, Mr. Chunky himself, a mimic, a displacer beast, and a gelatinous cube. And then there's a new set of 4 minis, these actually being money minis, not plushies, which feature the same things but not the dragon for $40. They feature a very funny looking owl bear, a very cool looking gelatinous cube. And apparently there's a 5th mini that isn't here yet because that would be a spoiler. So you can try to think, what would that be? That they can't show us yet.
Mhm.
Um, so we've included a link in the show notes where you can look at that. And the other thing that I saw that's in the preposterous category of being offered is another addition to, and I can't, every time a new edition shows up, I'm like, really, this is a viable product line. But they have their life size series of miniatures, bigatures, if you will. And Driz Do'Urden was the first one, and then there was a Quasit. I think there was another one. They have a Pathfinder one where they have like one of those Pathfinder goblin things that's life size. So now they've added maybe their only reasonable one of the mix, which is $100 life sized pseudo dragon. If you look at the link in our show notes, it actually looks really good. In fact, I think
Yeah,
just my
it does.
tweet the other day sold many of these for WizKids because people were like, "Yeah, I've pre-ordered that." It looks amazing, and it's the size of a hardback book, and sort of looks like it can be, protecting a book or your desk. And I thought that was actually really cool. It's also not, I
It
think.
was really cute,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah,
I would never buy such a thing, but this is the closest I've come to saying,
mhm.
okay, that's pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome. Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you're into such things, it can be had for the low price of 100 real world dollars, and the link is in our show notes.